Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 209 of the Nope Coach podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Kohlberg, joined today by the amazing Brooke Levitt. And we're going to be talking about experiencing burnout. But like really talking about burnout, not the buzzword kind of, let's talk about burnout and while we stick a affirmation and a nice pretty sticker over the top of it. So, Brooke, I was going to say throw you under the bus. That sounds really horrible. Like, why are the sayings like that always so horrible sounding? Pass the mic over to you and invite you. Where would you like to start with this topic?
Well, I'm just so curious to hear what your experience, or if you've ever had any experience with burnout and how you understand it.
It's a great question. So I'm Western medical traditionally trained. And if I'm being honest, not to sound like smarmy or whatever, but burnout isn't really recognized as a thing. It's probably changing now, but much like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, they're usually the things that a label that you give somebody when we don't really have anything else. So we're just going to wrap it up in a nice little bow and go burnout. So I haven't had a lot of official like touching of that as a term, because we would, from the Western thing, as I said, it's changing now, but we'll be looking more for, okay, what's underneath this? Is the person depressed? Do they have anxiety? Like, is there something else? And, or exhaustion, but even that, so officially, no, I would say I haven't actually had anyone ever say like, you've been burnt out, but unofficially, fuck yeah. Haven't we all? It's unfortunately, I think, a thing of the modern times, but so many of us don't pause and stop and rest because we are marketed and sold productivity at all costs, including your mental, emotional, and physical health.
Yeah, no doubt. There's the level of frequency is very confusing, I think, for people because they assume that just because they're experiencing this is the way it has to be. And we're, for some reason, taught that peace and prosperity are mutually exclusive. It's really, really confusing for people. And to be quite honest, we don't have a ton of people ahead of us who have modeled it all that well, right? We, at least for me, when I was coming up through the ranks of, big four management consulting, I looked at the people in front of me and thought, like I don't really want that. In fact, like I will do almost anything to avoid what it appears your life looks like from the outside. And that's usually the best version that even gets put out into the world, right? So I think it's quite confusing for people, but there is absolutely another way. I just wasn't sure if you had experienced this. And I've heard about your experience going to medical school, and comes to mind that you might have been in that space for a time, which eventually led you to leaving.
I'd love to know, like, how would you define burnout? Because, like, to me, like, full burnout would be like couldn't get out of bed kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't know, there's been some instances in my life where I've been very close to that, but there've been things that have required my attention. Like, I have children. I didn't have the option to not get out of bed. They needed to be fed and looked after and sent to school. And then, so I think it really depends. Like, some people, I speak to them and they're like, I couldn't get out of bed for 3 years, like really blew my adrenals and, was capable of nothing. And I was like, I've never been in a position where that was available. Like, I have gone to things where I have been so exhausted and really should not have been there. But that is what's been modeled. And then it hasn't been to the last few years where I work for myself and I was like, I became an entrepreneur for this freedom and flexibility that was, marketed to us, where on more than one occasion I have said to a client, like, this isn't going to be the best use of me today. I'm going to postpone this session. I'm going to reschedule. The first few times I did that, I was expecting the hammer, the backlash, because that's what you get in a corporate or in a, other type environment, to have people go, oh, thank you for modeling self-care. Like, yeah, let's reschedule. And having it, people go, it's okay. It's okay to not turn up to things. Like, it's not okay to leave somebody in the lurch, ghost them or whatever. But if you say, actually, like, at the moment, I'm going through a period of grief, I've been very upfront and very clear with my clients that, you know, things might take longer, or calls might be shorter, and giving them the option. I think the communication, would you like to pause? Would you like to whatever, or this is what I'm available for? Because I think sometimes we think that it's a very all or nothing. I'm either all in or I can't do anything, which is how we end up in burnout in the first place. Whereas when we negotiate what's going on for us and how much energy and capacity we have and communicate that clearly, I think we can actually, manage things really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I also haven't experienced the not getting out of bed for 3 years vibe. Thankfully, and quite thankful that that's never been my experience, but I have experienced it differently. And there's different types of burnout, and people probably aren't super familiar with that. We're quite accustomed to the idea of like just the exhaustion burnout, but there's also under challenged and there's also underappreciated. So it happens to look differently for most people.
Ooh, tell me more. I want to know more. It's got my attention. Underappreciated. I'm sure
my
audience can like, I'm sure there's ding, 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 ding happening as people tune into that one.
Yeah. So you can imagine the scenario where, let's just say you're in a corporate setting and you go to work all day, every day, and you are putting your heart and soul into this effort, and you kind of get the like, very middle of the bell curve on your performance report at the end of the year. And you're like, what? I know I can cuss. What the actual fuck is going on?
You're welcome on this show.
Yeah. I'm not even going to ask for that. Yeah, what is going on? I've been putting in everything and you just don't feel seen or heard or appreciated. And you've given up soccer games with your kids. You've missed date night with your husband. You have skipped things on the weekends for this job and no one is appreciating it.
I have a story.
Terrible.
I'll pause you right there. That one I can speak to. So I used to have a government job, and we had KPIs, key performance indicators, and we had to do 30,000 lines. It was either per week or per month. I can't remember. But that was the transaction expected of us. I used to do 70, so over double. And yeah, I was never promoted. I was never recognized. I never had any of this sort of stuff. And I thought, fuck it. So like one day I halved my effort. And I remember my boss at the time trying to bring me in to have the discussion and going to my higher boss and then wanting to put me on this performance plan and whatever. I was like, you can't. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I'm only required to do 30. And they're like, but you're capable of so much more. And I was sneaking in at 33. So I was like, my husband calls, and I've now learned there's a whole area of malicious compliance. So it's like, you want me to do this? Yes, I'm capable of all this, but I was never given anything or recognized or whatever. And our office got awards, and it was all, because of me. So that kind of burnout, hells yeah, I've experienced that one.
And how did that leave you feeling? Like, what was your appreciation of the job at that point?
Like I was absolutely ropeable, like really mad. I don't know if you guys know that term, but it was like, this is all the awards the office got, the stuff was all from my effort, and I never received anything, like no recognition, no thank you, no morning tea, no cake, like the other people got. And I was like, this is because of me. So then when I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to cruise here and check my email and look out the window and contemplate the meaning of life and, work half as hard as I'm capable of. The immediate, nobody asking what's happening, what's going wrong, is everything okay for you? But the immediate repercussion, we would have put you on a performance plan. And I'm like, excuse me, you can't put me on a performance plan. I'm not underperforming. Compared to what I can do, 100%, but compared to the standard. And it's funny you should say that, because just this morning, my husband, he's an engineer. He knows malicious compliance to the letter. They had this thing about the spending, and he's really good. He never overspends. He never asks for more. He never, whatever. Long story short, they were like, we need to cut the budget. So he's like, okay, so you want me to stick to this plan exactly? And they're like, yes. So he does, and ends up spending 10 times as much. And they're like, hang on. And he's like, once again, malicious compliance. It's like, as soon as we get cut the budget or whatever, none of your effort is being recognized, but we need to promote someone else or ding some other bell, so we're going to cut you back. And yeah, I see so much of that. And yeah, and it's part of the reason I left big government organization in the first place.
Of course, seems like the obvious decision, right? When you look back at it. And it shows up differently for different people, right? So for that one, you could just be demoralized, detached from work. You might be talking less. You might be getting called out for being obtuse during a meeting. It looks a lot different than the zombie that walks through the door vibe. So it looks a
what
lot
was
different.
the third one? So there was underappreciated. There's obviously the one exhausted, and you said one other and I missed it.
Yeah, under challenged. So it's a little bit kind of like, I think you have a mix of underappreciated, but also after you kind of have your work, the under challenged, you're bored, you're over it. All the hours you're putting toward work actually feel heavier than they are. So even if, from my experience, I used to work 80 hours a week. My second post in consulting, I was working like 50 or 60, but it still felt like 80 because of the weight. So it's confusing. Like, it might not be the hours, but it could be the weight of the hours if you're dealing with toxic people or not being seen, not being heard, and kind of looking around like there's got to be something better than this, which doesn't leave people feeling in a
and
awesome
under
spot.
challenge makes me think too, like the workload itself might be under challenging. Like it's, you could take on more or do more interesting roles or responsibilities, but also even the under challenging task can feel challenging, as you said, if you're in a toxic environment or you have colleagues or work people that you don't get along with or who take the credit. Like it reminds me of that school project, like where you all get the same grade, but tends to be one of you's done the work and the rest of you haven't. And to that end, when I was at medical school, we had a project that was worth a significant portion of our grade. And I had one of those in my group, talk about malicious compliance. And I said, this is what you need to do. And they refused. And I went to the lecturer, like you could call me a telltale or whatever. I was like, no, I'm not doing this guy's work for him. So I actually had it negotiated that he would be graded separately to us because it was like, carry your own weight, dude. So I've had that happen as well.
Yeah, not a super fun situation to be in, to say the least. And then we all know the classic burnout, and it looks different again for everybody. So it could be not being able to get out of bed for most people. They're actually still highly functioning during this period. It just doesn't exhibit to coworkers during that time period. So for me, my first bout of this was when I was working on a PhD, and I was 22. They should not let 22-year-olds start PhD programs. I'm quite certain of this now, but I would break out in hives, and for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And I was having like atrocious time sleeping. And so I would be doing yoga in the middle of the night just to get into enough of like a calm pattern. I mean, I was literally in the basement of a Michigan house in the dead of winter doing yoga on the cold tile floor because I couldn't even afford a yoga mat at the time, and doing like back-to-back yoga sessions just so I could attempt to go to sleep. Like Tylenol PM wasn't cutting it. And when I had like 3 hours to wake up the next morning, and it's kind of a wild story. I came home for Christmas my second year, and my mother we're very close, but she pulled me aside and she asked me, she's like, I have to ask you like a really serious question. Are you like terminally ill? Like, did you not tell anybody? And I was like, whoa. And she was like, you have open sores all over your body. You are way too thin. Like, you look really sick. And I was like, wow. Like, when you look at yourself every day, you don't see the changes. But I had been gone long enough. My mom was like, this is a hard stop. This is not healthy. And it often takes the third party to kind of be an honest mirror for us. It's pretty wild. And it can look 1,000 different ways, which is confusing, but yeah, intense.
100%. So we're getting close to the end of this episode, but we're going to have to continue this discussion. So Brooke, what do you do and where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I am a burnout coach, and this is the best part, I'm a deep rest retreat guide. I think we'll talk about the retreat in an upcoming podcast. But for now, if you've been listening to this burnout discussion and wondering, is it the under challenge, is it the underappreciated, or is it exhaustion, you can go to my website, which is brookelevitt.com, BROOKELEA. V as in Victor, ITT.com. And there is a little questionnaire you can look at and see, am I burnt out and which one is it?
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Bye for now.